what is that like to live in a community where there's outside entities that are actually taking away the future prospects for your children's well-being because they're not safeguarding the water that they're drinking. And in fact, that water is getting contaminated and knowingly contaminated and actually incentivized to be contaminated through a system of insurance and subsidies that are reinforcing the cycle of farmers cropping land that shouldn't be cropped by putting things on soil that shouldn't be put on soil. And that's happening deliberately and knowingly. And just for people to sit with that and to sit with the discomfort of that and the outrage and the fear and the sadness and the loss of that.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Lindley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label distinguishing organic crops grown in healthy soils and organic livestock raised on well-managed pasture. You just heard from Zach Wolf. He's the former farm manager at Al Gore's Real Organic Project certified Caney Fork Farms in Tennessee. We ran the first half of our interview with Zach last week, and if you go all the way back to the beginning of our podcast, you can look for episode 5, and you'll hear from Caney Fork Farms owner, former Vice President Al Gore. There he tells us why he chose to start a farming operation and why he got it certified with the Real Organic Project. What makes a hayfield more regenerative over time? Are you drilling in a lot more diversity, or does it actually come out of hay production sometimes? Are you running animals across it? What does that look like?
All of those things, yeah. Not cutting hay.
That's why I asked the question.
Not giving it a break. Yeah, but then also, we did also, speaking of importing fertility from the outside, we did work with an organic poultry producer in Kentucky to get composted poultry manure, which is a huge jump start. The other thing is putting hay back on the land you take hay off of, either in compost or for us, because we're in the South, we don't have barns, we don't feed hay on a pad. The animals are outside all the time because they can be. So that means that we don't actually generate a lot of spent hay manure mix for our compost system. So we get that. Bedding. Yeah, we get that material right back on the field, but it's about how you get it on the field, where it's distributed, the timing. Is it too wet? That's huge. If you're trying to have animal impact when it's too wet. And then I just see this window of here, what we found is February, March, when it's wet and you've been feeding hay and it's the soil is pugged up, and it's just inviting broadcast seeding. It's just give me some legumes. And so that's a window where we just go around and we just spread, clover mixes and alfalfa and different grass species, and it works.
Is that done by hand because the fields are too wet for heavy equipment? Or
no,
how
we've got
do you do that?
No, in our little buggies, we've got little 4x4, Kubota buggies, and then we have a seed spreader on the back of that. So we can fit maybe 30 pounds of seed in one go, which for legume mix goes a pretty long way when you're overseeding it into a hay field. Yeah, so that's been super efficient. In a couple hours you can cover 60 acres. Those are, that's it's not rocket science. It's just timing of hay feeding, giving it a rest, getting the fertility balanced, and getting different species in the mix.
So I'm curious about your orchards too. Are you trying to run animals through those?
Yeah, we do right now. So what we found works really well in the young orchards that we have here on the farm is cutting hay, because the trees are spaced far enough where we can get hay equipment through, and making sure that we're getting fertility back. So if we're cutting hay, we're feeding hay in the winter. And then in terms of grazing, what we found is if we double stake the trees, so the trees have a tree tube and 2 stakes. These are chestnut trees that are now probably this tall. We can actually put lambs out into the pasture. We have about 130 lambs this year, and all their whole finishing program is basically on cool season grasses, a lot of fescue, and we can basically, we still fence them, we still, rotationally graze them, but we can put them right in with the trees, which is huge from a management perspective, to not have to fence out the trees, and the tubes and the stakes protect the trees from getting pushed over. So we're integrating animals there, but the thing that we're really excited about is bringing animals over to this mature orchard, because it's like an hour from here. And so I think what we're going to do at the tail end of this chestnut harvest is actually drill seed some cool season annuals into those orchards, and then bring the lambs over and do some. It wouldn't be the entire group, but it would be, maybe the ones that we're finishing in that window, and graze through and get some hay and manure back in. And I feel like that will be one of the management steps that really gets the soil biology just cranking again. Yeah, that'll be beautiful to see. The landowner and his wife, just this lovely couple. They're in their early 80s. Like, I was talking with their family about it last weekend, and they're like, "So we're gonna have sheep here, like animals on the land, So that would be a fun one.
It's better than the 4:00 rooster, so it shouldn't impact them too much, other than a beautiful view
until they get out. Yeah.
So we're interviewing Paul Hawken for this as well, and he, in his book Drawdown, he's writing another one now, but in his book Drawdown, he said silvopasture was, in the top 10 for climate smart, the best climate agriculture. Do you want to talk a little bit about why that might be and the importance of it?
Yeah, I think it's just like, hey, those trees take up carbon. It's not overcomplicated. It's like the pasture. If the pasture is well managed, we know that can be a net carbon sink. And then if you add trees into that system, I think most people are understanding that, trees soak up carbon and put it in the wood, and in the roots. I think like the more exciting thing that we're still learning about is how the roots going deeper through the pasture actually could help integrate some of that carbon into a longer term pool, which is an important thing for people to understand. Is like, carbon is cycling all the time. Like, there's carbon cycling right between the tissue of the plants and the soil itself. So there's like this smaller carbon cycle, and then there's these larger carbon cycles. And for us to think about, actually sequestering in a stabilized pool, it's like, how do you get that carbon deeper into the soil so that if management changes, or you have a flood or a drought or whatever, that you're not losing carbon from the surface, basically. So I was really excited that he put silvopasture in there, and Eric Tosenmeyer is someone that is generous enough with his time, and I've been on the phone with him every few months and kind of talking about like what new crops are coming along that we might want to test out and integrate. And I feel like, in a polite way, want to push back a little bit on like the permaculture, forest garden-y community, and say like, it's all awesome, it's all great, but let's get realistic about how farmers are going to do this thing at scale, and let's get really good at a few crops integrated into an actual farming system. And so for us right now, what that's looking like is hay, lambs, and chestnuts. And that's,
all right.
that's enough complexity to make a system, and also make, I think, a farm that's actually gaining more economic viability, if we can find a way to have those trees in the system in a way where they're not a nuisance, basically, as you're trying to manage pasture, which is a real thing. Like, if you start to put trees back into your grazing operation or your haying operation. Yeah,
there can be so much efficiency in stacking those enterprises, and pest control. And do you have any different kinds of animals follow each other in terms of controlling pests?
The big one is the sheep and the cattle. So those are something that Gabi, who's been managing the livestock for the past 4 years here, has integrated, both in terms of like having those things graze at the same time in a mixed flurd, and then also at different times. And so right now we're messing with having the sheep graze different parts of the farm that we couldn't graze with anything else, and then cleaning up parts of the farm that have been missed by the cattle, or forages that the cattle have left behind. So that's the biggest one for us. And then, pigs fit into our rotation really as like a land renovator, like a tool that we put into pastures that we want to renovate that we might not want to till, and a way to get fertility back in, because we're feeding them grain in addition to planting things for them to forage on, but there's still a net import into that initial pasture, and the pigs themselves are doing enough disturbance to get us kind of a foothold to integrate new pasture grasses. Yeah.
Lucky pigs.
Yeah, and the chestnuts don't hurt either. So our waste chestnuts, that's going into the finish of the pork as well. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so now I have to ask again. Back to chestnuts. How do you harvest chestnuts? Do you put nets underneath? Do you let them fall to the ground?
It's actually a really important conversation within the chestnut community. No, I'm serious. Like I've talked with different folks. So like some of the biggest chestnut producers this side of the Mississippi go out with buckets and pay people by the bucket or by the pound.
To handpick.
Yeah. And the orchard that we took over management of was doing that, was harvesting by hand. And the thing about chestnuts that just really makes them particular is the husk, the prickly husk. And so that can make them harder to harvest with a lot of the other equipment that's used for, pecans or almonds or hazelnuts, which those are all slightly different, but they don't have that same husk. So we are actually just imported a machine from Italy to harvest the nuts with a vacuum, basically.
Oh,
and
wow.
We actually just kind of like unwrapped it a couple weeks ago, brought it to the orchard. Took me like 2 hours to like figure out what hose went where and what tumbler did what and what. I mean, it was just.
Well, we know you're an instruction reader,
yeah,
so that's
it was
good. It's probably in really good hands.
It was like this, Dr. Seuss moment of like, I don't know, put a bell on it or something, but it worked. Like we took it out, we let it rip.
You got that far.
Yeah, pushed the button on the PTO, and it's sucked up a mess of nut with husk and stick and everything else, and spit out a clean nut on the other end. So,
you could probably have fun with all the other jobs it can do on the farm. You can think about any other jobs that you need done.
Yeah, see what else it can suck up and spit out. So the short answer is we're mechanizing this year.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So Caney Fork Farms has signed up for the Real Organic Project, and you've gotten certified with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about why you decided to do that? Why you support the Real Organic Project?
Well, what I would say, is that some of the people, including yourself and Dave and Francis, that have really been pushing it, are people that I respect immensely, and also feel like they've contributed so much to this movement and really pioneered the movement. So when they put out a call and say, hey guys, this is happening, pay attention, I take it serious. I actually read the newsletters and pay attention. So there's that piece of it. And then the other piece of it is all of the information that you've put out there in terms of what's happened with, confinement dairies getting certified and not actually putting animals out on pasture. That's a big deal. Grain coming into this country and being certified as organic that's not actually organic. That's a big deal. Hydroponics, a soilless growing system being certified as organic. I mean, it's like something, it's kind of like Trump being president. It's like something out of a movie. Like if 50 years ago, you were like, this dude is going to become president who is this business guy and had these TV shows. It's like, no way. This organic movement is going to get soil taken out of the system. It's like, no way. That's the foundation. And the hydroponic thing alone is enough, I think, for most people to be like, well, wake up. What does organic even mean at this point? And So it's hugely disturbing, and I don't think enough people know about it. And I think it's been great what you guys have been doing to tell the story from the lens of the farmer, and also tell the story of how much integrity there is in the farm community that's using the organic certification, and then how there's this other community that's racing to the bottom and basically diluted the integrity. And that's a big deal. That's a really big deal for people whose families and livelihoods and communities have been benefited by having a place on the shelf that's differentiated and protected. And the fact that we've lost that protection is massive. And so I feel like the reason we're involved is because we believe it's important, and we believe it's very important right now.
Do you think it's important that we try to reform the USDA as opposed to breaking out and doing our own thing? Do you think it's even possible to reform the program?
I don't know. You know the answer better to that. I'm not a policy guy. I feel like, as far as I understand the USDA, it feels like it's too big of a thing to simplify, right? It's a massive organization, and there's, I'm sure, different streams fighting against themselves within that organization, and different priorities trying to sort themselves out. So I don't know if it's going to happen with USDA, but I feel strongly that it's a moment for people to be outraged, for people to say, this, and this is just one example. You could point to so many other things within the food movement that are just outrageous and robbing people of basic rights to clean water, clean air, clean food. And that, as a citizen, that's outrageous, and that's not right, and that's something that we need to fight against. And unless groups like this are fighting against it, it's the same old story. There's money to be made on the back end of all of it. So whether or not that reform can happen through the USDA, I don't know. I just know it needs to happen. And if it means that there needs to be a breaking out and a reshuffling, then maybe that's what needs to happen.
One of the things that Jennifer Taylor told me, who's been part of this movement from the beginning, she was on the National Organic Standards Board, and she's a farmer in Georgia. She said, they can change the laws, they can change what USDA organic is, but they can't take the organic movement away from us. Mm. And that was really empowering. So I think it is a time to, like you said, come together and remind everybody what this movement is all about, and build a movement around it again. Because I think a lot of farmers who started it, just, farmers are kind of introverts, and they like to get busy, and they're busy, they're doing all the work on the farm. Yeah, and I think a lot of them are retiring now who were part of, creating the standards, and all of a sudden have some time and want to make sure that, they can pass on, the word organic to the next generation and have it mean something. And so I think they're waking up. And it's important for young farmers to also be involved, even though we're busy just like trying to get our head above the water, find land and right.
This is a problem. It's so much pressure on the farm and the farmer, and I really feel strongly like it's enough of a crunch, and farmers tell the story, and farmers should take part in activism, but at a certain point, farmers also need to be whole human beings that are able to recreate and rest, and it's too much for it to all fall on their shoulders. So this relationship with a broader community and a broader understanding of the contribution of a healthy farm and what that means in terms of the ecological benefits and the community benefits, like that the level of value that should carry for us as a society and as a culture, and how I feel strongly that should be protected and strengthened, like that message I feel needs to be spoken because it's like it can't just rest on the farmers and the farm community. I think the farmers and the farm community can make a fuss and make noise and tell the story, but it really needs to be taken seriously by those that have that, whose job it is to create new policy and protect those people in our culture that are doing good work and need protection.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know if I had the opportunity to talk to a policymaker, I think that's the one thing I would say, especially because so many policymakers are using the word regenerative right now. And it's a little scary because there is no definition for what that means. And, you know, Dannon has regenerative program, and, you know, General Mills has one, and there's an organic regenerative. And it's just the opportunity to co-opt that word, it's already happened. And if that's the word that we're all using to describe our movement, we need to make sure that we're protecting it and it actually means something. And
the word regenerative,
thing,
you're saying.
A lot of policymakers are using that word now, and it's over organic because organic has been so off-putting to conventional farmers. And this word regenerative seems to be welcoming to everybody. And I just have concerns that, you know, what does it mean, you know, when you call yourself regenerative in the marketplace? And so I'm really glad that you all are doing the research to see if we can actually come up with a standard that, you know, talks about carbon sequestration on a whole farm kind of systems-based level, because I think it needs to happen.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well,
I'm curious what the role of consumers are in all of this, because I feel like every time you purchase food, you're choosing to support values or not. And so it's what advice do you have for people who are shopping?
I agree that's an important message. Yeah, the simple thing is, like, if you can, and you can learn more and look harder and make those choices, please make them, because it makes a difference for people's livelihood and for your community and for, you know, the quality of your drinking water, you know, and air. And it's pretty basic, you know, it's like we're learning, the science is supporting that. It's pretty fundamental. Like, you can't shortcut your way to a cheaper food system without compromising community level health, is what people are really finding. So I think that's an important message. And I think that the other one, and I think the more complicated one, and the one that I don't have an answer for, is just the response to what's happening and I keep using the term human, because I feel like it's an important one to understand, like, what rights we have that I feel are God-given as a human being on this earth, and the fact that those rights are being deliberately walked over and on top of. Like, that, used the term before, outrage. It's sad. It's not right. And I think for us, for people to really grapple with that at a personal level, of like, what is that like to live in a community where there's outside entities that are actually taking away the future prospects for your children's well-being, because they're not safeguarding the water that they're drinking. And in fact, that water is getting contaminated, and knowingly contaminated, and actually incentivized to be contaminated through a system of insurance and subsidies that are reinforcing the cycle of farmers cropping land that shouldn't be cropped, by putting things on soil that shouldn't be put on soil. And that's happening deliberately and knowingly. And just for people to sit with that, and to sit with the discomfort of that, and the outrage and the fear and the sadness and the loss of that, like, and then from that place, for communities to come together in a place of support and understanding to make change. And I think that needs to look different in all the places that it needs to happen across this country. But the first step, I feel strongly, is to really just grapple with what has been lost, what's being taken away, so that we can create what needs to be created that we don't know exactly what it looks like. We're still discovering it, but it's very different from the reality that most of us are experiencing day to day.
I feel like industrial ag is getting even faster and faster at figuring out how to co-opt the next kind of movement, and how should a consumer handle that? Because of course, most people, I think, if given the opportunity, they will pay more for for food that matches their values. But a lot of times they're tricked. There's the picture of the chicken on the pasture when that's not the reality of where those eggs came from, for example. How do they navigate that confusing marketplace?
I don't know. These guys are tricky. It's funny because it's like a lot of my conversations with neighbors I have here who I know might feel differently than I do politically, or might not believe in organic. But I was talking with one about like the experience of not going shopping because of the pandemic, and like no one wanted to go to supermarkets for a little while, and he's like, and he's a farmer, and he's like, I don't want to go to the store anyway. I know it's all crap. I know it's so it's like at a certain level, I feel like people understand it and just might not have as much agency and choice, or just, the choices aren't that good to begin with. And so it's like, and not have access to something like this and what we're producing. So it's like, I don't know. This question of consumer choice is such a tricky one to know how much I feel like we should all be responsible citizens, and part of that is being responsible in how we spend our money, and that has huge impacts, obviously. But I feel just as impactful are the inner experience that we allow ourselves to face, and how we integrate the information that we're getting, like the policy stuff, the climate stuff. It's all heady stuff, but to have that live viscerally is a different thing. And I think part of the problem is we haven't been taught as a culture how to live viscerally, right? We've actually been taught how not to live viscerally, or through the body, or through the feeling. But just to start to talk about that and integrate that, I think that's where the empowerment comes from, because people are motivated to make change, not through I should because I understand this conceptually. It's like I will because I am. I will because I am part of this. I will because I have family that I have sworn to protect. That's like my duty. And so that's a different thing. And so much of this feels divorced. It's like you go to the store and you see it on the shelf, and like that lives in a world, and then you go home and you look at the mountain or the river, and that's a different world. And so this experience of connecting like who I am and where I stand, and this earth and how it enters my body, like that experience is a life-changing experience. And that experience is the gateway to activism that I feel like we need to be facilitating or talking about.
It's the gateway to truly understanding health.
Yeah.
And I think so many people are sick right now, and they can't understand from the food they're eating, they can't understand how to get healthy. And they're trying so many different things and getting so much help. Young people too. Sad. And it's getting back to the connections of, where is the food coming from? How is it grown? How does that affect, like you said earlier, the healthy carrot? What is a healthy carrot? We've lost that. Does it taste better? Probably taste and nutrition are pretty well connected. What's the diversity of all the carrots that I eat?
Yeah.
There's so much to it. And I think that's part of the problem. It's like we can't just say in a single sentence what this movement's all about, because it's a lifetime of education.
Yeah. And like everything you just described there is really fun. Like what an experience too, to like relearn like the depth of flavor, to relearn like the depth of cuisine. And I don't mean expensive elitist cuisine. I just mean
grow
like
it
good
yourself.
Food. Yeah. And so it's like, again, I come back to this, like there's a God-given human experience that we're being robbed of right now, and deliberately. And like, how do we right that ship? like collectively from all angles of culture, not just farmers, not just eaters, but just like it's all angles of our culture that are being inflicted by the same greed, short-sightedness. And on the back end of that greed and short-sightedness, I know there's suffering and I know there's confusion, and it's not some guys in some office somewhere, in like the evil doer thing. It's just a mess. It's just like a confused mess. And I do think that it's like the answers that we're striving for, we don't know what they are. We don't know exactly what the solutions look like. But the things I feel strongly about, they're only going to come through reconnection. They're only going to come through people having conversations in different ways that are messy and uncomfortable and unpredictable, by having solutions emerge rather than being imposed, and by people getting back in their bodies, their feeling bodies. And like that is the source of information and learning that's needed right now. It's not more, I mean, as much as we were talking about data and how data and science are important right now, like that's a layer of it. But the deeper layer, I feel personally, speaking for myself, is the human experience that's missing.
And it has to be multifaceted, and we do need good policymakers. And I feel like we've had them, and the second they really try to make a difference, they lose their jobs, really stand up and try to deliver, they're gone. So that's a problem too, that I think it needs to come from so many directions. And it's wonderful if we can grow our own food and know our farmer, but it also has to be transparent in the grocery store. And for that, we need good laws and good enforcement. So I don't think it is one answer. I think it has to come from so many different angles.
No, and this idea of creating a certification system that has integrity is hugely important right now. Hugely important, and rebuilding it. And I think what ROP is doing is great, because it's sort of saying, it's not trying to throw out, the baby with the bathwater. It's saying this was something that was created by the community. We're protecting it fundamentally, and we can do better. And getting back to what you were talking about earlier, we can create a system that has a higher degree of integrity, transparency, and is actually built around helping farmers improve. That, I think, added to what you guys are already doing, is something that Demeter is doing. I know Rodale with, we talked about regenerative not being defined right now and how that's problematic. People are working in that space. And it kind of, it feels like, when you were describing before, like regenerative agriculture right now is at this moment where it feels like it's already getting co-opted, or there's companies like, you mentioned Danone and General Mills. Both of those folks are part of the open team. And so it's like, I see them similarly as like entities that are multifaceted, that have probably different things happening all at once. And then people within those organizations that are very, very strongly pushing to maintain integrate integrity. And I'm not passing judgment on any of it as good or bad. I'm just seeing them showing up in some way. So it feels like regenerative is at this messy moment, to be honest, where it's like it hasn't been defined yet, no one owns it yet, people are throwing the term around. At the same time, it's maybe having people push harder, because there's this like striving for a new concept, and I don't know what's going to come out the other end of it. And maybe it's another term, maybe.
Right. And my fear is that it's not a new concept, but it's happening now, and the farms that are doing it are going under because the terms are not well defined. Organic is not well defined right now, or it is well defined, but it's not being enforced. So we have that kind of farming now, and we're not fostering it.
Or protecting it. I guess it feels to me like a moment to recreate something too. Like it does feel like something's dying in all of this that wants to be recreated, and I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I feel that at the same time, and I
like the idea of it being the partnership between the people who started the movement in the first place, 40 years ago, and then all these young people that want to farm right now, you and me included. So what advice do you have for a young farmer just getting started? Because that's so important for those farmers to make it and keep farming another season.
Take your earbuds out and stop listening to podcasts. No. Listen, no, that's one big piece. Like, learn how to listen. Learn to like take the feedback that's coming to you from the land that you're managing, like, and integrate that. And be patient and be humble. And this is something I've worked on in my own farming career, is like, you come out of the gates and you want to get it all, and it's taken me a little while to like come back, I think, into true humility of being like, gosh, I still have so much to learn, and gosh, I still want mentors in my life and teachers. And so to be humble and patient, and understand that a lot of farmers have things to teach you that aren't tangible necessarily. Like, I think back to my own career and like the farmers I worked with early on, and how much was being kind of transmitted just through the experience of working with them, that wasn't like me asking solid questions about what varieties they were growing or where they got, the equipment, things I could write down. It was the experience of being with them in the field. That was just things, layers of something was moving between us. And that's
you were sharing microbiomes, right?
Yeah. So I guess those would be my things. Be patient with yourself, and don't push too hard too quickly, because I have seen a lot of burnout, and I've seen a lot of people just go all in, especially with the new farms, like going all in, and hearing these stories of farmers going out and making, a million, whatever it is, hundreds of $1,000s per acre, and just nailing it right out of the gates. And it's great to be aspirational, but also like, just from what I've seen and in my experience, it takes time for a farm to come into its own entity. And so to be patient with that experience.
Yeah.
And
it's hard to rush Mother Nature, right?
Yeah. And to like also understand farming is like a business, and like any small business, there's huge risk involved. And a lot of people, when they start small business, have backup plans and have other sources of income. And that's not something to be ashamed of, or think that you shouldn't have to do to get into it.
I think the knowledge is exactly what I lacked when I got started, and it's what made it so difficult. But at the same time, I wouldn't change a thing. I'd say go for it. Learn in the way, like in the process.
Go for it. Yeah, make mistakes.
Yeah.
Bite off more than you can chew. What was your experience?
And if you're someone who can't handle mistakes, like, do something else, or figure it out, because you're gonna make a lot of them, and that's okay.
That's interesting. You mean like, don't be a perfectionist?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to be a perfectionist, because it's inevitable. You're gonna make a ton of mistakes, and that just happens, and it's gonna hail, and things are gonna happen to you that you didn't foresee.
It's funny you say that. One of our researchers here, she's a student, she started working on the farm, and I had that experience with her one day when we were setting up fence, and I was like watching her look at the fence after we set it up, and I was like, are you a perfectionist? And she's like, yeah, something I've been working on. And I was like, I get it. Like, I was like, this is going to drive you nuts.
Well, a lot of perfectionists have really amazing farms that I just, are jaw-dropping. My farm is very different.
Tight ship. Yeah.
But there's a lot of ways to succeed. I think that's a good lesson too, right?
Yeah. I think the other thing that I'd say is, like, for the young farming community, of which I may or may not still be a part of, is like, give each other a little bit of slack. Like, sometimes I feel like there's this kind of like rite of passage thing, or you're not good enough until thing, or I don't know what it is. And so it's like, just to
we're in this together.
Yeah, extend like a little bit of courtesy and like understanding into that space, to like hold people in it, no matter what scale the farm is or how badass they are at it or whatever, and just allow that community to really be multifaceted and meet the new farmers where they're at, I think is important.
And I think where the community could really help with that sort of competitive aspect that you're talking about between farmers is if there were enough markets for our stuff, we wouldn't be like that, So go and support all of us. And, the more you are supporting us, I feel like the more we can cooperate together.
Yeah, that's a great message. Buy more good food. Well,
thank you, Zach. I took your time a little bit longer than I intended, but it was a wonderful conversation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. It was fun.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. We hope that you will subscribe, tell your friends, and leave us a rating and a review so that others can find us. A video version of this interview is found at realorganicproject.org/episode 94. Please join us next time when we'll be speaking with Drew Rivers, one of the founding farmers of Full Belly Farm just outside Sacramento, one of the longest running CSA farms in the area. To support this podcast and our certified farms, become a recurring donor at realorganicproject.org, and you'll get the benefits of being a real friend, including our book club where you can ask many of our favorite authors your questions. We're so excited because our next guest is Alan Savory. He's the founder of Holistic Management International. I hope to see you there.